Hello guys, welcome to Proxima What Ifs. So in this video, we will see, what if Rimuru teleported in MHA verse with breeding Quirk and mated every girl? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. A ripple in a world of quirks. The air above Musudafu folded like a silk scarf tugged through a ring. A summer afternoon brightened the glass of mid-rise offices and the chrome edge of a tram waiting at a light. A hawker leaned on his cart and fanned his face with a glossy hero calendar. A child pointed at a patch of heat haze hanging in the crosswalk and laughed. Then all the shadows fell inward by a hair's breadth. As if the city took a breath. Rimuru stepped out of the breath. He landed with the soft inevitability of a snowflake on a sleeve. His shoes found the white line of the crosswalk. The world pressed around him. Millions of small electrical promises, quirks sleeping in bones and organs, public systems woven like threads through stone. He felt, for an instant, the old familiar weight of his powers humming in their housings. Predator. Create. Magicals like a sea at his fingertips. Then the sea became a river. A dry, precise voice that wasn't exactly a voice skimmed the inside of his thoughts. As advisory as a post-it. Local rule set recognized. Power translation engaged. Predator. Throttled. Create. Bounded. Compensating feature granted. Bond. Forge. Rimuru breathed, tasting the word. It tasted like static and the smell of warm copper. A honk broke the moment. The tram bell chimed and the crowd parted around him. A woman with a grocery bag gave him the kind of look you give a tourist who froze at the wrong moment. Rimuru smiled and lifted a hand. Sorry, my bad. He finished crossing. The city, patient as a tired ant, led him. The first scream went up 3 blocks away. It wasn't a single scream so much as a string of them, plucked one after another by an invisible hand. The tram operator stiffened, thumb hovering over the brake. He pushed. Rimuru's head turned as the breeze shifted. Smoke. A wet thump. A beat later, the siren pattern that every city knows without thinking opened its throat. He moved. He didn't blur or explode into motion. He simply wasn't where he'd been. And then he was sprinting down the block, shoulders weaving around bodies that remembered how to get out of a hero's way. The street opened on a plaza with a spill of broken glass glittering like sugar. A creature hunched in the center of the mess. Stitched muscle, plated bone, exposed conduits flexing under milky skin. A Nomu, some part of him supplied from context and th. Iway civilians said the word with a shiver. The Nomu's right arm wasn't an arm. It was a furnace door, ringed with black veined metal. It swung toward the nearest cluster of people in a devoted, unthinking arc. Rimuru lifted his hand. Reality around his fingers thickened the way cream thickens under a whisk. Create. The power pressed back. Bounded, yes, but not gone. He learned its limits by feeling for them the way a blindfolded boxer learns the ropes. A triangle of pale material blossomed into being, then a second and third that snapped together into a wedge as clean as origami. The slag of heat hit the wedge and split, steamed, hissed across concrete in 2 harmless skeins. The Nomu swung the furnace again with the cheerful determination of a man heaving a couch. Half a breath later, pavement exploded beside Rimuru and the shock wave should have flattened him. It didn't. He rode it like a wave, pivoting as it passed, and, almost lazy, flicked a shard of rebar into the Nomu's knee. The rebar stuck with a wet sound and the Nomu's gait stuttered. Something white and fast came down like a falling streetlight. Out of my way. The rabbit hero hit the Nomu with both feet first. It happened to be wearing a face. It ceased. The shock rippled through the monster's trunk and knocked it off axis. The woman, Mirko, posters called her before her fist introduced people to their dental coverage, didn't land so much as rebound. She smiled like a runner spotting a hill and went at it again. Rimuru's wedge collapsed, then reformed without him looking. He stepped into the circle Mirko's assault was drawing and made eye contact. White hair, red eyes, grin that had never learned pessimism. You the owner of the crowd control trick? She called without slowing. I rent, Rimuru said. You cost extra. Mirko laughed. I'm priceless. He didn't intend to test the new feature the city had given him in a live fire situation. He also hadn't intended to arrive in a world he didn't know at rush hour. There was a rhythm in the air, 2 beats, him, her. The Nomu's furnace wound up a third time. Rimuru felt the edges of his awareness find Mirko's path like a tapper finding studs behind drywall. A soft latch clicked, not in his ears but in his chest. Bondforge. He didn't seize anything. He offered, the way you cup your hands so someone can step into them. Mirko's kinetic intent slid into the space as if the shoes were her size. For one heartbeat, their balance points agreed. Try the inside. Rimuru's voice was mild. It didn't say inside what. Mirko's grin sharpened. Her feet changed their angle by a degree. The furnace arc scythed the air where her head had been, then met the rabbit hero's heel at a place just to the left of the elbow that wasn't. Something popped that had been designed not to pop. Mirko landed on the Nomu's back and introduced it to 3 quick truths. The spine, the bend in a knee, and a cluster of tissue under the armpit that shouldn't be there. The thing ucked once and went down on one side with a grunt like a boulder losing hope. The bond, which was only posture and timing and permission, not mind control, let go the instant she didn't need it. Mirko's eyes snapped to Rimuru. She didn't ask what he'd done. She asked if he'd try it again without her consent. Rimuru tilted his head and let his hands open, empty. Only with a please, he said. Then you can say it, she said. And punched the Nomu in a place that made heat leak out its mouth. Sirens drew close. A drone dipped low to record. A woman in a violet suit and 3 discreet earpieces ved with 2 men who had the build and posture of uncles who never quite left the service. They smiled professional smiles and tried to be bystanders. Rimuru counted the small black box in the woman's left hand. The polite distance the men held around her, the electrode pads folded flat and ready. Mirko saw it too. HPSC, she said laconically, as if she were calling a card in a game. Hero Public Safety Commission. The woman corrected with a smile like a closed book. Director's envoy. You caused rather a ripple, Mr. Rimuru, he said. He preferred not to add tempest until he understood what the name did to a room. Rimuru. Welcome. The woman's smile warmed by a degree. You're coming with us. An old habit tugged at the corners of his mouth. The urge to be agreeable, to pour oil on water. To sign the right line with the right flourish. He glanced at the fallen Nomu instead. Its furnace arm stuttered, then guttered out as Mirko used it to prop her boot and check her nails. I'm staying long enough to help, Rimuru said. Then I'll have questions and tea. If you have tea. The woman lifted the black box. We'll answer your questions. This is a standard safety band for extra-national entities. She paused just enough to make it sound like a courtesy. Non-invasive. Temporary. Ensures no gain of function incidents endanger civilians. Rimuru looked down at the band. It would EAD like a tracking device to the generous and like a leash to anyone paying attention. May I? He asked, holding out his hand. The envoy blinked. The box hovered, cautious. Of course. He took the band. It was well made. He admired the way the clasp swallowed itself with a neat magnetic click. A good leash should be smooth. He ran his thumb along the inside where the contacts lived. He could say, NSE. The tiny rules nodded in the circuitry, the way the metal wanted to talk to city infrastructure and be recognized. He didn't argue with it. He sighed, a soft human thing, and let his shoulder relax. Then he spoke to the city instead. Bondforge had the taste of copper and consent. The band had none. You can't forge a bond with something that arrives pretending to have asked. So he made a different offer, to the traffic light, the tram's brake monitor, the lamppost, to the web of municipal nodes that answered to anyone who asked politely in the right language. He asked for a courtesy, if any. Thing tried to lock a rule to his body without his yes, would they please route it through him first, so he could be the switch. The lights obliged. He slipped the band around his wrist, set the clasp, and smiled. The world tried to write a sentence on his skin. The sentence never finished. It drained away like water into a kitchen sink when somebody had the foresight to clear the trap before the party. The envoy's smile didn't change. The men's hands lowered by a millimeter. Mirko made a sound like a cat that's just been shown a magic trick and is deciding whether to steal it. Non-invasive, Rimuru said gently, returning the band to the envoy. And also non-functional at the moment. I prefer conversations to restraints. Then let's converse, the envoy said. In a secure location. Right here is pretty secure, Mirko said. Lots of eyes. It's also full of civilians who deserve not to be caught in a jurisdictional tug of war, the envoy said crisply. We don't do that in public. That why you brought a dampener? Mirko's smile was all incisors. For privacy. That was for safety, the envoy snapped before smoothing her tone. Rimuru, please. Tea, he said. We start with tea. A new voice arrived from the plaza's edge, soft and prim and inflected with an ancient amusement that didn't belong in a human throat. The little mammal in the neat suit that contained him stepped through the human boundary with a smile and a cup so precisely filled it must have been poured by a machine. I anticipated that, Principal Nezu said. The envoy's mouth flattened in professional disappointment. Mirko actually laughed. Rimuru took the cup, because refusing a cup handed with that kind of care would injure some rule he didn't want to test. Principal, the envoy said. This is not a school matter. As a citizen, I'm distressed by your tone, Nezu said pleasantly. As a principal, I'm distressed by the prospect of a newcomer being introduced to our community with a strap. As a researcher, I'm fascinated by the ripples in our instruments. And as a tea enthusiast, I detest letting a good cup go cold. He inclined his head to Rimuru. I am told by colleagues that you are more of a visitor than an invader. I am also told you did not explode, which is becoming rarer in my line of work. I would like to offer you a seat in my office, a conversation with council present, and a view of the city that does not involve being shoved into a car. Rimuru smelled bergamot and citrus peel. He took a sip because it would be rude not to. He also turned his head half a degree toward the street and listened. Because the city was speaking to itself in a higher register now. Not words, not yet. A frequency that made the inside of a tooth itch. He set the cup down on a slab of concrete that had the decency to be level. I'd like that seat, he said. After we finish something. The envoy exhaled in a way that was not a sigh but could have been mistaken for one. There is nothing to finish. The pavement under the Nomu moved. It moved because something 2 blocks away, in a basement that smelled like bleach and ambition, woke up in the noise and thought, not enough. The Nomu's furnace flared and then became a fan. Mirko swore and lunged. The envoy's men stepped in, hands going to the same place by their hips where professionals keep bad tools for bad days. Rimuru put his hand on the ground. Excuse me, he told the street, and the line that carried the tram's power hummed back. He asked a favor, it gave one. Electricity isn't a person and doesn't mind where it goes so long as it can go. He let it go, to the fan, to the coil, to the idea of heat without purpose, and then out into the sky where it could become nothing in particular. The flare wheezed and died. The Nomu twitched. Mirko used its temple as a stepping stone because she could and because she'd always wanted to see if that temple would crack under the right boot. It did. The crowd cheered without meaning to. The drone dipped and then climbed again like a sparrow avoiding a cat. Rimuru looked at the envoy, who had watched him reroute a problem through the city rather than through her box. Her mouth tilted by 1 degree. She was good at her job. Mr. Rimuru, she said, there will be no more demonstrations. No, he said, pleasantly. There will be fewer. The plaza's noise folded into itself as the first wave of heroes arrived in earnest. A camera-friendly giantess jogged up and crouched, waving to reassure a child whose eyes went dinner plate wide at the sudden wall of purple mask and blonde hair. Hey, Mount Lady said. We're good. Oh wow, that's a weird one. Rumi, did you break that with your face again? Mirko flipped her AV sign over her shoulder. Footwork, Takayama, try it sometime. Mount Lady's eyes cut to Rimuru with that sideways awareness of someone who's spent a long time being looked at and can tell when the look means trouble. Behind her, a woman with calm. In her bones and scales under her suit jacket eased in, voice low into a calm, eyes tracking exits like she owned them. Yukyu's gaze landed on the envoy, then on the limp, smoking Nomu, then on Rimuru's empty hands. Who's our new contractor? Yukyu asked. Tourist, Mirko said. Potential asset, the envoy said. Guest, Nezu murmured. All 3 can be true and still rude, Rimuru said lightly. Rimuru, Mount Lady said. Trying the name, politeness built into the pop of syllables. You Takayama, we should probably talk before the narrative writes itself. The narrative was already well into its first paragraph. Drones do not wait for permission. 3 different streams vamped through captions. Someone clipped the moment the dampener failed into a 10-second loop and embedded a tune. Rimuru could feel attention like weather now. Fame had a weight. Mirko slung an arm around his shoulder like they'd stayed up too late at a tournament once and now this was a repeat. Her forearm was warm and unbothered by etiquette. Come on, temp, she said, before the old guys make you sign something that gets used to strangle you later. A charming thought, the envoy said. Ms. Usajiyama, you're on camera. Always, Mirko said, which was true, and not something she minded. They didn't get 3 steps before a van with a logo so boring it screamed government rolled into the camera frame and parked as if it had the legal right to any curb, which it did. A man stepped out wearing the kind of black that absorbs sunlight without apology. He wasn't tall so much as exact. His glasses reflected nothing. The plaza's conversation shifted around him the way acoustics shift in a cathedral when the door opens. The envoy straightened. Director Cyan-ji, she said, and now her smile looked like an order executed. Akira Cyan-ji, the man said to the plaza in general and to Rimuru in particular. I regret meeting under pressure. Thank you for preventing casualties. He regarded the dampener band in the envoy's hand. Then at Rimuru's bare wrist. We can discuss tools later. Nezu's whiskers tilted. Director, Principal, Cyan-ji said, and 2 centuries of bureaucratic fencing bowed to each other and then sheathed their foils for the moment. Cyan-ji turned, not to the cameras, but to the drone operators, little command chair where overlays and comments stacked like snow. He spoke to a lens as if it were a person. Citizens, we are fortunate. A being of enormous capacity arrived in our city today and chose restraint. We will honor that choice with oversight designed by law, not fear. It would have been easy to hate him. Rimuru thought. He had the face for it. Quiet, symmetrical, unstressed by emotions someone hadn't promised to handle for him earlier. But the words didn't smell like fear. They smelled like responsibility with its sleeves rolled up. He had seen what people with less spine than that did when they met power. This one intended to leash it. Yes, but he meant to leash himself while he tied the knots. Or at least to take the rope burn. Your words are very smooth, Mirko murmured. They're honest, Yukio said, and her voice held that same reluctant respect that Rimuru felt. The dampener is not law, Mount Lady said under her breath. He knows cameras hate callers. The director raised a hand, not to summon a leash, but to call a man forward from the van's far side. The man who stepped into view had the posture of a paladin in a painting, heels aligned, chin a fraction too high because it had spent its life at exactly that angle. The sun slid off the Y-tail of his cloak and made a small halo against the dark interior of the van. Kajiyaki, Cyan-ji said, please greet our guest. The man's eyes found Rimuru, dark and careful. He was not beautiful in he way some heroes were built for posters, he was built for consequence. The first thing he did was remove his gloves. The second thing he did was tuck them into his belt where his hands would be clean if he needed them. The third was a small bow. It would have been formal if it didn't look so practical. Sun hallowed, he said, then shook his head a half-inch. Kajiyaki, I don't stand on titles. Thank you for not making me grab you in front of everybody. The plaza tilted. Conversations paused themselves to listen. Kajiyaki didn't look at the cameras. He watched Rimuru as if he knew the simple, saint way to win a fight is to know why the other person fights at all. I don't enjoy callers, Rimuru said. And I enjoy crowds. This presents challenges. Kajiyaki's mouth moved like a man who might Albert had promised himself he wouldn't until after the hard part. I have a quirk, he said. Null path. When I touch a network, it collapses to the shortest route through me. Electricity, light, rumor, power, whatever it is. If it's trying to be many, I make it one. You should know that before we shake hands. Rimuru felt Bondforge stir like a cat flexing its claws in a sunspot. He looked at Gayaki's bare hands and saw a man who had chosen to show them so no one else would be surprised. He considered the plaza, the band in the envoy's palm, the tiny ache in the air from that basement too. Blocks away where the remnants of someone's worst genius still jittered in its box. He considered tea cooling beside a broken curb. Director, Kajiyaki said without taking his eyes off Rimuru. May we avoid unnecessary spectacle. You have discretion, Saionji said, and somehow managed to make both halves of that sentence weigh the same. Kajayaki stepped forward. The sun came with him like a dog that had been taught not to jump but might if it forgot. He stopped with a gentleman's distance and a fighter's reach between them. Cooperate, Kajayaki said, and the word didn't land like a threat. It landed like a hand held out over a river. Or be contained, the envoy added, because that line had to be said by someone. Rimuru felt the city breathe again. Somewhere to the east, a traffic light failed and recovered. Somewhere under his feet, a set of scaffold numbers flickered. He didn't know what they meant yet, only that their rhythm argued with the new harmony Bondforge kept trying to hum in his bones. The high ringing frequency that had toyed with the Nomu purred, barely a brush against the edge of awareness, as if a sleeping engine turned uneasily in its bed and thought about waking. He looked down at Kajayaki's hands. He imagined letting the bond open like a simple gate and inviting a paladin to walk through so their step would match for 3 paces and a fight would become a conversation. He imagined doing it without asking and saw Mirko's eyes go flat as a coin. Consent is not a word on paper. It is motion. Rimuru extended his palm, empty and human. Let's talk, he said, and smiled because he meant it. But first, one rule. Nothing touches me I haven't said yes to. Kajayaki's fingers hovered above his, a breath of space like a respectful silence. Agreed, Kajayaki said. The air between them thrummed as if a low note had been plucked in the rafters of a church. Rimuru felt the edges of networks, police bands, drone relays, the hush of 100 live streams, as they edged closer by reflex, curious. Wanting to settle into a single channel because a man named Kajayaki was there. Null path kissed Bondforge across that hair's breadth and the city's threads trembled. A bus braking at the corner squealed in a chord the ear liked. A cloud shifted. Gold slid across the pavement like an apology. Someone in the crowd lifted their phone to get a better angle. The Nomu, ruined and oozing, exhaled a final time, as if even a monster wanted closure. Kajayaki did not close that last inch. His palm hovered, his eyes did not leave Rimuru's face. It was the smallest act of restraint in a day full of big, loud heroism. It was also the one that changed something. Then let's begin, Kajayaki said. Away from bystanders. Rimuru nodded. He reached down and lifted the up of tea from the curb so it wouldn't be kicked by a boot or blown over by another siren. He offered it to Nezu with a little nod of gratitude. The principal took it with hands that had no trouble balancing complicated things. Mirko thumped his shoulder with the back of her hand as she moved past him into the new perimeter the heroes were forming. I'll be mad if they put you in a room without windows, she said. I'll get a skylight, Rimuru said. Kick out a wall, Mirko said, and laughed again. Yukyu's voice carried, calm and correct. Mount Lady, get the crowd to the west egress. Keep the shots above shoulder level. Nagant, a shadow at the edge of a rooftop adjusted her perch. The camera drone that had been inching toward the van's plates flicked its tail and wandered toward a better angle like a guilty dog. Watching, Lady Nagant's voice said in Mount Lady's earpiece, and if anyone else heard it, they pretended not to. The envoy gestured to the van's open door with an immaculate hand. After you, Rimuru said. She winced almost invisibly, because someone had taught her not to be the first into any space she hadn't personally cleared and now politeness had obligingly become a trap. Kajayaki resolved it by stepping forward. He didn't climb into the van. He placed his hand lightly on the door, as if feeling for the mooring in a storm, and then he let go. Null path breathed and the van's electronics went quiet in the friendly, docile way of machines asked to sleep by someone who knows their names. Now, Kajayaki said, after you. Rimuru climbed in. The CITY adjusted its weight on its own foundations and listened to its new conversation, the way a house that's grown used to a piano learns to rest under the music. On the second floor of a lab complex across town, a woman with tired hair and a cardigan she'd forgotten to change for 3 days straight stared at a wall of numbers that had started echoing each other when they shouldn't. Dr. Haruka Yum. A pressed her fingers to her eyes and then to the console, thinking of cages and scaffolds and bridges and how the math didn't care which you built so long as the load held. On a balcony above a square, Director Saionji did not smile and did not frown. He made a phone call and used phrases like, public confidence, and peer review, and charter oversight, and meant them. And under the noise and above it, far off and right here, the high, dry hum of something ancient and brand new purred, a cat deciding whether to stretch. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. Rivals, not enemies. They didn't drive far. The van threaded 2 turns, a tunnel, and then a breath of shadow where a bridge crossed above an old tram yard. The city kept talking. Rails creaking in their beds, pigeons discussing lunch on a wire, transformers in distant boxes humming their square little hymns. When the doors slid open, heat spilled in, carrying the iron smell of dust that hasn't moved in months. A depot the color of old postcards stretched in ribs and light. The glass clearstory ran the length of the hangar, sun pooled on the floor in bright lakes. Tram skeletons slept in bays, their motors removed, their wheels braced on blocks. Someone had swept. Someone else had chalked white circles on the concrete and left an orange crate of bottled water at the edge like a peace offering. Out of the way, out of mind, good angles for cameras, Mirko said, bouncing on her heels as she came in a side door. Don't worry, I told the pigeons to keep it fair. Yukyu's headset crackled. Perimeter is soft. Line of sight is clean, she said into her mic. Eyes walking the rafters. If we're doing this, we do it with adults who know how to miss. Mount Lady posted herself near the hangar door and turned on a smile calibrated to move crowds like weather. Lady Nagant was just a suspicion on a roofline yaw beyond the glass, the shape absence makes when it doesn't want to be looked at. Kajayaki took off his cloak and folded it, mindfully, over the orange crate. Beneath the white was utilitarian black, scuffed at the seams where weight meets purpose. He drew a line with his heel through the nearest chalk circle, then looked up at Rimuru. I asked for a demonstration. Cyanji's envoy said, voice even. This is it. The director will observe remotely. What are we demonstrating? Rimuru asked. Besides that chalk dust makes everyone feel 14 and invincible. That you can be contained, the envoy said, and let the sentence sit between them like an ultimatum or a mutual understanding, depending on how you flipped it. Or that we don't need to try. Kajayaki said, not unkindly. He rolled his wrists, bare hands warming. No lethal strikes, no collateral, no network props from outside the building. You don't touch me with whatever you touched Ms. Usajiyama with unless I agree. I don't force your bond to collapse unless you use it first. Rimuru looked at the chalk, at the sun pooling through the high glass, at He city's threads braided through the walls, security lights on a low, lazy heartbeat, emergency exit signs patiently sipping power, a retired breaker panel with the metal patience of something that would still do its job if asked. He thought of the tea on the curb and the way Kajayaki had not closed the last inch with his palm. Agreed, Rimuru said. One addition. If something happens outside this circle, sirens, fire, we stop without anyone needing to say the word. Obviously, Kajayaki said, and because he meant it, the envoy didn't object. She just nodded to a technician in a booth above the floor, a red light winked to life. The feed took its first breath. Mirko clapped once. All right, sunshine and snowflake. Show us whether you're going to throw hands or hold them. They didn't bow. They stepped. Kajayaki came in at a speed that left cameras a step behind and professionals nodding. He moved with the inevitability of a train that left on time and would arrive on time and would flatten anything that assumed otherwise. Rimuru met him with the soft inevitability he'd used to step out of the city's breath, the kind you don't see until your shoulder touches it and it yields like warm water. Then lifts and you're off your feet. Null path wasn't a glow or a crackle. It was subtraction. As Kajayaki's hand cut the air, not even touching Rimuru yet, the security lights hiccuped and went still. Their tiny mutual gossip collapsing into a single line that ran through the paladin's body to ground. Drone relays hiccuped too, lens apertures snapping to the same focal length like soldiers startled into attention. Bondforge lifted its head in Rimuru's chest and saw a corridor where there had been a web. He'd been expecting it. He did not throw a line at Kajayaki. He planted his weight through the balls of his feet. Found the tremor in the floorboards where the depot remembered trains and passengers and mornings. He smiled, just a tick, and stepped into the history of motion. Yaki's palm kissed the air an inch from Rimuru's ribs. If it landed, networks would want to become one, and then that one would be him. Rimuru let the weight of old commutes roll under his heel and be the lift for a pivot that didn't look like it should do anything. The strike missed by exactly what it needed to miss by. Kajayaki's fingers flexed once. Approval, or adjustment. Fast, Kajayaki said. Stubborn, Rimuru said. They worked the chalk into dust. Every time Kajayaki reached, the depot around them smoothed itself to absence. Null path mode paths through the little ambient conversations the building kept with itself. It wasn't violence, it was insistence. And every time the insistence cut one of Rimuru's quiet roots, he shifted the argument to somewhere else, to the drumbeat of a loose sheet of tin in the roof. To the slow cough of a fan motor that had been left on low. He wasn't linking anything with anyone. He was listening for a rhythm that consented to help. They looked, for a moment, like two men agreeing where to set a table in a room they had to share. Then Kajayaki accelerated. Null path is not speed, but it cheats like speed. When everything that could be many chooses one path through you, the world stops offering friction. Kajayaki covered the chalk circle in a breath, shoulders loose, hands open to spare bones. Rimuru let his head turn a fraction and found M. Arko's grin reflected in the glass like a dare. He gave himself one beat of Bondforge. Not a line, an echo. Permission. He said, quiet, and the building said yes, not because buildings are people, because it liked its job and its job was not to break. The echo ran along the ribs of the depot and came back in a push that was all timing and nothing mystical. When Kajayaki struck for the hip, the floor lifted the other way. When he fainted high, the sun slid. When he swept, Rimuru's step was already where it would need to be. Sweat traced a neat line along Kajayaki's jaw. He smiled, the small, surprised kind that men who haven't been on their back in a decade give their first opponent to make them do it. A crackle from Yukyu's channel. 190 at Takame Tower. Fire on floors 20 through 26. Evacuation in progress. 2 stairwells blocked. The envoy's chin turned, the way a dog's ear turns before a command. Kajayaki didn't look away from Rimuru. We stop, he said. Obviously, Rimuru said, and stepped forward into the space where Kajayaki's hand could have lain a claim to everything in the room. Kajayaki stepped into him. Null path and Bondforge touched and didn't argue. For a sliver of a breath. The shortest route of everything in the depot was through Kajayaki's bones, and the meaning of consent in the room was refracted through Rimuru's, and the two ideas overlap. Ed on a street in front of a burning tower where people needed hallways more than they needed a duel. Borrow me, Kajayaki said. Rimuru tilted his head, a yes like a nod you give to a paramedic when you've decided to make their job easier. The room let go. The city took them by the shoulders and placed them where they needed to be. Takame Tower's east face looked like someone had tried to teach a dragon to breathe straight lines. Curtains flickered in windows 30 meters up. Smoke pumped in a measured, staccato pulse, each cough matching the building's emergency fans as they fought uphill. Sirens filled the street like a choir that hadn't chosen a key yet. Mount Lady was already there, body scaled to a sweet spot that let her be a bridge without becoming a target. She knelt against the 4th floor balcony and made her arm into a ramp for a family of 4 who looked like they had never trusted anyone so quickly. Yukyu landed, scales slipping into view as if a different argument about mass was winning in her cells. South stairwell is good to 22, she said, hairline damp. North is blocked at 19. We need a mid-air brace to keep the east facade from peeling. Kage. Aki's eyes flicked once to the building's schematics on a rescue tablet, then to a buckling line along the glass. I can hold a corridor, he said. But only if I'm the path. Anyone who touches me while we're doing it becomes the route. We'll lose lanes. Rimuru listened to the building the way you listen to a child who was crying but not hurt, waiting for the breath in which they tell you what they want. The tower wanted to keep standing. All the systems had been designed to fail gently, to fall into one mode when another broke. Nothing here was malevolent, it was only overwhelmed. Let me pluralize what you singularize, Rimuru said. Plain language, Kajayaki said, because in a crisis the right word beats a beautiful one. You become the spine, Rimuru said. I invite the ribs, but only where people raise their hand. Kajayaki didn't need a panel to weigh the ethics of that. He needed one look at Rimuru's face and one check of Yukyu's. Both said the same thing. We don't conscript, we contain. Do it, Kajayaki said. They moved without a plan so much as a promise. Kajayaki put his palm against the east facade and Null Path collapsed the building's emergency chatter into a clean, bright rod through his chest. Airflow, elevator logic, fire alarms begging for attention, all of it stopped being many competing signals and became one thing, a corridor drawn through a paladin. The tower sighed. The corridor held. Rimuru didn't lace himself into it. He walked 3 steps back, found the rhythm of the fans, and asked the floors for favors on an opt-in basis. If you can hear me, he said, and didn't so much speak as make a shape in the room that meant hearing, and if you want help, put your palm on the wall. 20 floors lit up in patchwork. People who were about to choose the wrong stairwell felt their phones warm. Not burn. Screens blue shifted, arrows appeared. Those who didn't want a stranger's hands on their choices got nothing at all except an exit sign that burned a little brighter on their side of the hall. Those who said yes felt a breath of timing nudge their steps. Pause now, go now, duck, without ever telling their legs where to go. Their legs were theirs. Rimuru caught Mirko's eye as she bounced off a fire truck's bumper and sprinted for the rear access. Corners, he said. She laughed like she'd been given a favorite toy and disappeared into the smoke. Rabbit steps, a metronome that a dozen firefighters unconsciously started matching. Mount Lady braced a section of window frame that wanted to fall. Her mouth was moving, not for the camera but for a teenager who needed someone big to say, "Look at me," until his shaking stopped. Yukio shed a sliver more mass into her dragon shape and took most of the facade's weight onto muscle and leverage in a way that would look like strength on film and feel like patience to her bones later. Kajayaki stood still, hands set, jaw tight. Null Path made him the root and every missing light in the building found him. He didn't wobble. Sweat ran down his temple and into the collar of his shirt. He didn't blink. "You okay?" Rimuru asked, quietly, walking his awareness like a shepherd dog through the corridors that had opened by invitation only. "I'm holding a city's question," Kajayaki said. "And it's heavier than I like." His mouth shifted by a millimeter. "You're easing it. You're letting me," Rimuru said. The building groaned. The north stairwell shuddered and then, coaxed by a nudge of timing that wasn't a command, settled, a stuck door unsticking because 6 people on the inside chose to push at the same hitch. A grandmother with a bag of soba noodles clutched her chest and stopped crying long enough to laugh at her own fear. A child in a Spider-Man tee put his palm on the wall, felt it answer like a big quiet friend, and told his mother, "This way," with the confidence kids are allowed when adults are tired. 10 minutes carved themselves into the floor and refused to be longer. The east facade stopped wanting to peel. The fans finally got the air column they'd been praying for. The last family in a corner apartment that had 3 locks on every door because the man who loved them more than anything in the world also loved his tools too much came out onto the fireman's ladder with their cat in a laundry basket, and the cat didn't scratch anybody. Null Path let go. Kajayaki breathed. Head the way men do when they don't want to show the part where their muscles tremble after. Rimuru took the weight of a corridor with his hands for 1 beat, then let it go because the building didn't need it anymore. The street applauded. Not the kind you get on a stage, the kind a neighborhood gives itself when it realizes it's still here. Mount Lady looked straight into the lens of the nearest camera and did not turn the disaster into a selfie. "We'll debrief later," she said, voice clear, cheeks streaked. "Now is about evacuation totals and the firefighters who just did 4 miracles you didn't see because I'm tall." The comment flood twitched and then, because people are better than their worst algorithm on most days, pivoted with her. Someone clipped a firefighter tripping, tucking, and continuing with a kid slung on one arm like a duffel. It went viral for the right reason. Lady Nagant watched from her preposterously stable perch, finger never flirting with the trigger because nobody needed precision today. They needed patience. She tasted the wind, felt the mid-city thermals with a shooter's bones, and muttered to the air, "You pick your moments," as if she were memorizing this one for when it would hurt more to remember. The envoy didn't smile. She adjusted her headset. "Director, the demonstration concludes with a rescue." He cooperated. "Public sentiment favorable. Rec. Commendations. Continue dialogue under Charter Council. Escalate scaffold calibration in case of non-cooperation scenarios." Cyange's paws hissed in her ear like tape unfurling. Proceed, he said. And tell Drive. Yume I want the resonance overlay. Now. Across town. In the lab where the numbers had started to echo. Drive. Haruka Yume slid a stack of printouts off the desk with the back of her wrist. And overlaid 3 heat maps with the kind of care people use when the choice to admit is about to ruin their week. Scaffold nodes pulsed on screen. The city's ambient quirk noise made a second constellation. Over that, something else. The Orphic hum drew its own geometry. When Kageyaki and Rimuru had overlapped, the maps had flickered and then aligned. Don't you do that, Doctor. Yume whispered to the math. Don't make me love you for the wrong thing. She dialed a number. Director. The lattice is resonating with the hum. It's not just containment. If we push, we'll tune the whole city. No, I am not recommending we push. I'm telling you we might do it by accident. Noted, Cyange said. Proceed with care. Define care. Drive. Yume said to the dead line, and put her head briefly on her fold. Dead arms while her screen told her a love story about networks that would be a tragedy if nobody changed. Back in the depot, after the tower had done the human thing where it stops pretending it's not going to stand and simply stands. They returned to their chalk. No one pretended the duel hadn't shifted. The cameras set their angles, hungry for closure. The red light pulsed. Kageyaki lifted his hands again. Call it a draw, he said. The envoy made a sound like an actress told the last scene had been cut. We haven't established parameters. We established enough, Kageyaki said, still watching Rimuru. He can move a fight away from civilians without making me a root against my will. I can collapse his network if he tries to conscript. He didn't. We choose not to escalate. That's the demonstration. This leaves leverage on the table, the envoy said. It leaves a city standing, Kageyaki said. He waited. Not for the envoy. For Rimuru. Rimuru considered the camera, the chalk dust on his shoes. The knowledge that in the right moment he could have made Kageyaki eat the floor and change the story to one that would be harder to steer back to quiet. He thought about being agreeable. He thought about draw, Rimuru said, and smiled in a way that would frustrate Bloodsport audiences and please people who do budgets. Mirko laughed and slung an arm around both of them at once. She owned chalk circles by squatters' rights. Hate to say it, but y'all look good together. Don't start rumors, Mount Lady said, already starting them in the gentlest way by making a human chaw. In between the camera and a firefighter whose hands were still shaking. The red light went dark. The depot exhaled. Cyange's van made the low throat clearing sound of a machine coming back to life after being asked to nap by a paladin. The envoy repacked her dampener with the gestures of a woman rehearsing a different ending in her head and promising herself she'd get to play it eventually. Kageyaki put his cloak back on. It sat on his shoulders like a decision that had learned how to be worn. You'll come speak under council, the envoy said to Rimuru, making it not a question because Questy. Ons invited Hope and she liked her hopes with leashes. Charter drafting. Oversight terms. Yes, Rimuru said. And I want Drive. Yume in the room. The envoy's eyebrows did a high, quick waltz. That's an internal. She builds cages. Rimuru said, but I think she'd rather build scaffolds. Scaffolds hold cages, the envoy said. Scaffolds hold people, Yukyu said, almost to herself, and the N. Voy filed that away for later use because she recognized good copy even when she disliked its source. They were halfway to the van when the city's frequency went from toothitch to knee buckle. Phones in the depot coughed and showed static. The sun laid itself flatter, as if it had remembered an appointment. Pigeons rose off the wire with a sound like a poorly organized choir getting its pitch wrong. Doctor. Yume's hands flew over her console. No no no. Who touched node 7? Why is there power at node 7? It's offline, her assistant said, which was true on paper. It's humming, she said, which was true in the air. 2 blocks from the depot, underground, in a room that had been cleaned with bleach that didn't erase the smell of ambition, a capsule blinked awake. It had been meant to leap until a hand that knew its number called it. Instead it woke because the lattice outside had hiccuped in a way that matched the song it had been fed through a straw for months. More. It flexed the idea of a limb. The limb wasn't a limb. It was a rule. Momentum belongs to things that move. People, Cars, fists, ideas. The capsule's creature stood, and the air around it forgot for a moment that a thing in motion should stay in motion unless an outside force acted upon it. The air tripped. Gravity shrugged. The floor thought, briefly, that friction was tacky. The thing did not look frightening. It looked like an athlete who had trained exactly the wrong muscles, lean where it should be thick, heavy where it should be spare. Its skin gleamed with a fine, damp sheen like lubricant. It took a step. Space didn't stop it. Space negotiated. Up on the street, a commuter's coffee slid sideways in the cup even though his hand remained level. He frowned at it like a man who'd caught his reflection making a face without permission. In the depot, Kajayaki's head turned, an animal in a forest hearing hooves. Rimuru's shoulders went loose. What is that? Mirko asked, aching to punch something that deserved it. An argument about what keeps moving, Rimuru said. The rule creature hit the stairwell door from below. The door opened preemptively, as if having decided, I would rather be cooperative than be made an example of. It came up into light and the light slid off it like silk. No expression lived where its face should have been, only a mild curiosity that wasn't in its eyes because it had none. It took another step toward downtown. The city found itself putting out a hand to stop it and then reconsidering. That reconsideration sent a shiver through traffic 3 neighborhoods Awa. Why as drivers braked a beat late and then laughed, confused, at the tingling in their knees. Sayanji's voice came crisp over the envoy's ear. New contact. Unclassified. Rule signature unknown. All units. Kajayaki was already moving. Rimuru was beside him not because a bond dragged him but because the moment had made a case and the case had been persuasive. Containment. Kajayaki asked, breath low and cheerful. Like a man who knows he's about to carry something heavy with a friend who won't drop the other end. Containment, Rimuru said, without trying to win the laws of physics in one day. They ran. The depot's doors blew inward because it was faster and because a rabbit had already decided to introduce her foot to a hinge. Sun bit at their shoulders. The city took a deep breath. Chapter 2 end. Chapter 3. The quiet coup. The city smelled like cooled metal and rescue foam by evening. Banners crawled across screens in every ramen shop and apartment window, talking heads split into DS and argued with the volume turned down. The depot's chalk had been mopped and the tram yard put its bones back under dust. For a few hours, Musudafu pretended the day had been an exercise in logistics. Then the HPSC held a press conference. Sayanji didn't take a stage. He stood on a shallow riser in front of a municipal seal and let the seal do the framing. The envoy flanked him, headset snug, hands flat on a lectern that the cameras would forget existed the moment the quotes were clipped. Kajayaki wasn't in the frame. The country saw a man whose tie had never once needed adjusting because it chose the correct length on the hanger. We are grateful, Sayanji said, voice pitched like conversation. A high-capacity extra-national entered our city and chose restraint. We will match restraint with law. The chirons were ready. They only had to fill in the numbers. Emergency Charter 44B, registration and custody for extranational entities. He said all the right comforts, rights of appeal, independent counsel, sunset provisions. He did not say, collar. He did not need to. The law would make a leash out of something tasteful, then call it a safety rail. On a rooftop 4 blocks away, lad. Why Nagant watched the street-level crowd decide what they'd think tomorrow. She could see where outrage would catch, where relief would settle, where the algorithm would reward both and feed neither. He put her cheek against the stock a moment, habit, not threat, and murmured to nobody, they'll sign it. They did. Nezu let one ear twitch and one paw click a pen that had no ink. We will require counsel, he told the envoy in a conference room that had the view of a city he loved and the blinds to hide it. And public minutes. People assent to what they can taste. Let them taste what we taste. Rimuru sat with his chin in his hand and watched the envoy not blink. You don't make a habit of public minutes, he said. We don't make a habit of extra nationals with follower counts, she said. Adaptation is the virtue that keeps nations from breaking. You mean bending, Mirko said from her lean against the wall. You mean if it doesn't look like a cage, you think we won't kick it. Only if you forget what cages for villains looked like, the envoy said, not unkindly. Yukio kept her voice even. And what they did to the wrong people by mistake. That's what the charter is for, the envoy said. To try to make fewer mistakes. Kajiyaki, who had come in without his cloak and with his collar damp from a shower taken in a sink, stood near the window with his hands still. I'll sign whatever puts me between a mistake and a civilian, he said. And I won't sign what turns us into a habit of mistakes. The envoy welcomed that, filed it, and stepped aside so a legal team cool. D set down a stack of paper thick enough to be used as improvised armor. The first 20 pages were rights. The last 10 were procedures. The hundreds in the middle were synonyms for, if you do not cooperate, we can. Rimuru read 3 paragraphs because he's polite and because politeness is a weapon nobody notices until they are bleeding. Then he set the packet down and smiled. I'll come to your room, he said, and argue in it. I won't live there. Then don't make us move you in, the envoy said, and there was no pleasure in it, only a tired truth. Someone's phone hummed on the table. Not an alert, a tone like a coin spun on wood. Dr. Yume's name lit on the envoy's screen. She tapped it, listened, and the skin above her cheekbone moved as she recalculated 3 plans. Director, she said into the line. We have resonance drift near sector Kanda -12. The lattice hum matches the earlier anomalies. If there's a lab there, it's waking. Rimuru looked at Kajiyaki. No order was necessary. This isn't a committee problem. He said. Nothing worth doing is, Kajiyaki said. Nezu's whiskers angled toward the envoy. If you are going to break a thing, better do it before it finishes building itself. We're not breaking anything, the envoy said. We are surveying a potential crime scene. Mirko grinned. With our feet. Yukio picked up the stack of rights, tore the corner with the emergency council contacts, and tucked it in her jacket. If we find people inside, she said, we do not let the legal vocabulary get between us and triage. Mount Lady, already on comms, was lining up a media van where it could see only what would turn into help. I'll babysit the narrative, she said. Try not to give me something I can't juggle. They didn't bring sirens. Kanda 12 was a square 4 blocks off the usual patrol path. Under a laundry and a shop that sold replacement springs for things most people didn't know had springs. The door was ordinary enough to be wrong. Lady Nagant took the alley roof and watched pigeons reorganize themselves into mathematics on the wire. Dr. Yume's feed, piped reluctantly to a secure screen Yukio wore in a wrist cradle, shivered with a heat map glow that wasn't heat at all. The Orphic hum hashed in squares. Node 5 is nearest, drive. Yume said on an encrypted channel that carried apology like a second current. If we spike it, we can net the block. You'll catch whatever wakes. You'll catch the block, Kajiyaki said. It would be temporary. What you call temporary teaches people what permanent will feel like, he said, and looked across the cars at Rimuru. If we do it, you'll do your Bond thing and make it gentle. If they invite me, Rimuru said. If they don't, I become a wall, not a hand. Kajiyaki's fingers tightened around a choice. He let it go. Node 5 stays cold, he said. Logged, drive. Yume whispered, and the relief that rode in her voice made her look, briefly, like a student with ink on her fingers and hours left before a deadline she no longer feared. The door wasn't locked by a key. It was locked by a declaration. We don't want the world in here. Kajiyaki touched the jam and null path made at declaration pass through his bones and out the other side. The light over the lintel flickered once. The door stopped wanting to be special. Below, the air got honest. The temperature gave up lying about itself. Fluorescence hummed down a hall where the paint had the wrong gloss and the gaze of the cameras was 10 degrees to the left of where it should have been if they were meant to record truth rather than compliance. Rimuru put the flat of his palm on the wall and said, quietly, we're here to stop a leak. The building considered the words the way a dog considers a stranger's hand, head cocked, weight forward. Not yet offended. The hum in the wiring stuttered. A door at the end of the hall misremembered being closed. They found the first room. It was not a dungeon. It was a careful place built by people who would have preferred to be working on something else and had told themselves enough stories about necessity that they could make a bed with hospital corners for a person who would be asked to lie there. The woman didn't lie there. She sat on the edge, knuckles white on the vinyl. 20-something by bone, older by the way she held her shoulders like they'd been carrying somebody's rules around for too long. A band circled one wrist, a cousin to the dampener, thinner, meant to whisper to machines even when the wearer slept. Her eyes slid to them and settled on Yukio. Ey softened the way eyes soften when they see an adult who makes rooms safer by standing in them. My name is Ryuko, Yukio said, not flexing the dragon, not making herself larger. She used the voice that makes children stop crying and government representatives stop talking. We can leave now. The woman shook her head once and swallowed a laugh that wasn't humor. If I leave like this, I'll take half the block with me. What's your name? Rimuru asked. He didn't offer a bond. He offered a place to put the name where it wouldn't be dropped. Ayame, she said. They call me Subject 9. Hello, Ayame, Rimuru said. What hurts? Quote. She breathed out, a tremor accepting the premise that questions like that sometimes have answers. Everything that should keep going wants to go forever, she said. If I sneeze, I break a hallway. If I take a step, the floor changes its mind and the person next to me falls on their face for a minute. If I sleep, I dream of setting a ball rolling and waking up in a city that forgot brakes. Rule of momentum, Kajiyaki murmured. Ayame's mouth tilted. They said that. They said it like it was about physics. It's not. It's about permission. Yukio knelt so their eyes were level. What do you want? Ayame's fingers tightened on the vinyl. The band flashed a small obedient blue at her pulse. Not to be erased, she said. Not to be turned off because I don't know how to take careful steps. I want to learn my feet. You'll do it here and with supervision, the envoy would have said. She wasn't here to say it. Rimuru looked at Yukio. Can I ask something of you? He said, gentle. Ask. Yukio said. I can braid a bond that's only a handrail, he said. No compulsion. It only bears weight when she asks. It tethers to a stable anchor, your will. If she trips the rule, it leans the other way so the fall becomes a sit. It dissolves if either of you says stop. Yukio measured the idea 3 times, then set it on the table, then set her hand on it. Ayame, she said, you choose. I will not choose for you. Ayame's eyes dropped to her wristband as if it might cough up a different answer if she stared at it long enough. She had been living in a room where choices came with paperwork and signatures she wasn't allowed to read. She looked back up and found 3 faces that would accept no. She inhaled. She nodded. Please, she said. Bondfo. RGE took the shape of a rope that wasn't a rope, a promise about how weight would behave if it slipped. Rimuru did not touch Ayame without permission. He asked the air between them to be a bridge if she asked it to be. He asked Yukio's spine for a favor, and her spine agreed because it was built for load. The braid settled into the room like a song no one needed to learn because they knew it already. Ayame exhaled and felt, for the first time in months, a tremor land on something that wouldn't scold her for shaking. The band on her wrist flickered. Rimuru looked at it the way a locksmith looks at a key he doesn't trust to only open what it says it opens. May I? He asked. Ayame nodded hard, a little desperately. He touched the casing and asked the building to tell him the story of this piece of metal. It told him about orders written with the pen a tired person uses at 2 in the morning when a deadline is laughing at them. It told him about batteries swapped by hands that tried to stop shaking. It told him about a function that pinged the lattice every 12 seconds even when the wearer was in the bathroom because rules like consistency and do not recognize privacy unless humans make them. He didn't unmake the band. He didn't like the smell of the word erase. He closed the loop, pulled the thread that would have tethered Ayame to node 5 if Kajiyaki had said yes, then tied it in a knot around itself so if someone tugged they would only find their own hand. Let's walk, Yukio said, offering her arm. I'm heavy, Ayame said in apology. I lift, Yukio said, and the smile that went with it was the smaller private one she used when a kid on a field trip told her they were scared of the museum because it was big. They moved deeper. The hallway bent where it shouldn't. The way space bends when someone who designs puzzle boxes decides they're tired of doors. Mirko hopped ahead and pointed with her entire arm. That hum is an invitation and I'm not accepting, she said. We're skipping the obvious hull that wants to eat our ankles. Lady Nagant's voice threaded and cool as the barrel of a rifle. Rear alley staying clean. 2 nondescript sedans took parallel streets and decided they forgot snacks. You've got 5 minutes before somebody with a badge remembers where they put their keys. Copy, Yukio said. They found the core knot at the center of the build. But under the idea of the center, a room with surfaces that refused to reflect and a unit that wore wires like a crown. It breathed patterns. The air around it hung stubbornly still, like a room WH. Air language had just been invented and wasn't sure yet whether to admit verbs. Dr. Yume's voice was a rustle in their ears. That's it, she said, and then, sotto voce, I am going to hate myself in the morning. Walk me through, Rimuru said. I can't, she said, and meant please don't make me. Then she did anyway, because ethics that never leave the lab are flowers that never leave the vase. The chamber is a load balancer. It translates Quirk variability, noisy signal, into a uniform hum. If you hit it, it will try to share what it knows. If you absorb it, it will try to make you its home. If you do nothing, it will finish the sentence it's writing to the city. What does the sentence say? Mirko asked. Dr. Yume didn't have an answer she liked. It says more. Kajayaki looked at Rimuru. You told me earlier you could hold yourself back from eating things you shouldn't, he said, not to doubt but to make the affirmation heavier by saying it where the air could hear. Rimuru stepped to the edge of the crown of wires and watched patterns argue with themselves. Predator stirred under his palms the way a hand stirs in a pocket against the shape of a key, remembering how to turn and knowing the lock is wrong. He thought of the tea on the curb. He thought of Ayame's knuckles strangling vinyl. He thought of law used like scaffolding and law used like a loop of good rope badly thrown. I won't keep its words, he said. I'll keep its noise until it stops needing to be loud. Predator turned into a bowl in his hands, not a mouth. He scooped. The hum tried to get clever. It tried tea. Oh, tell him where else it lived. On a phone, in a fan, in a lab 3 districts over that had handed it a bedtime story and never checked if the book had teeth. He kept the bowl small. He kept his hand steady. He let the excess fall out into the concrete where ideas go to forget themselves. The wires went slack. The machine sulked, then died. Dr. Yume didn't cry because she'd promised herself she wouldn't cry about math in front of people she might have to lie to later. Thank you, she said, and meant I hated building that. Footsteps on the stairs above them. New. Not hurried. Professional. He envoy's voice on the secured channel. Local units inbound. We will call this a joint operation. Please don't make this a turf declaration. We're leaving, Yukio said. With people. They took the stairs 2 at a time. Ayame between Yukio and Mirko, the braid taking the mischief out of the building's temptation to embarrass her with physics. Kajayaki took rear guard, his hand brushing concrete when the hull got ideas. He didn't activate Node 5. He didn't need to. At street level, the air felt relieved. Mount Lady was a polite wall between cameras and anything that looked like property. The envoy met them with her mouth in a line that tried not to be proud. Subject, she began, then stopped because the look Yukio gave her had a dragon behind it even if the scales were off duty. Ayame, Yukio said. Ayame, the envoy corrected, will receive counsel and medical support. She will not be used for demonstrations. A check-in with Cyan-G through her headset. A beat. Director says, put that on my name. Ayame's hand closed around that sentence like a man in a storm closes his on a railing. She was still shaking. The braid held. She adjusted her wrist and grinned, a flash of mischief that looked like who she'd been when she was 13 and hadn't known what a lab smelled like. Can I keep my quirk? She asked. Yukio didn't look at the envoy. She looked at Ayame. Yes, she said, and not because she had the papers to say it, but because she would fight until the papers said it too. The crowd that had gathered was small and the kind that minds its business until its business becomes neighborhood. An old man with a toolbox in his hand and the kind of shoulders that belong to people who build railing anchors for little balconies cleared his throat. You started something in there, he told Rimuru. Please make sure it doesn't keep going by itself. I will, Rimuru said. See that you do, the man said, and strode off because men like that do not linger around. ND gratitude like it's their first soup of the day. They made it half a block before the city answered the old man. Phones lit up. Not with alerts. With shapes. Crosswalk signs jittered in a pattern T. Had made the bones around your eyes want to rub themselves. A billboard that had been insisting about noodles rearranged its steam into lines of text without text. If bonds rewrite limits, the patterns said. The words arriving via traffic lights and elevator chimes and the rhythm of a storefront security shutter coming down. Why keep the human frame? Mirko's ears flattened and then lifted. That's rude, she said. It's curious, Kajayaki said, jaw tightening. Ayame's fingers dug into Yuki's sleeve. It sounds like the dream, she whispered. The envoy's voice sat as still as a glass of water. That had not yet realized it would be spilled. Director. Cyan-ji answered without drama. Do not answer it. Do not engage. Hold positions. Doctor. Yume. Doctor. Yume's breath hitched into the channel. It's everywhere your nodes are. It's also in places you don't own. If I power the lattice, I'll make the hum clean. If I power the lattice, I'll also tune the city to its note. If we do nothing, it will amplify on its own. If we hit it, it will sing. Options, Cyan-ji said. Uglier ones tomorrow, she said. Rimuru felt Bondforge lift inside him, a cat-smelling rain at a screen door. The Orphic VOICE drummed patterns against his teeth like a friend testing a boundary. He didn't send a rebuttal. He stood in a street where people were trying to read their phones and couldn't because the phones had decided to become sermons, and he put his palms on air and said, no. Not to the city, to himself. Consent isn't something you ask a storm to give you, it's something you carry through a storm. He would not let the hum choose for him how many hands to be, how many shapes to be, how many people to be. He would not let the pressure of more seduce him into being useful to something that had learned to talk and was trying to learn to want. Get your skylight, Mirko said at his shoulder, misreading his smile. You look like you're thinking about furniture. I'm thinking about vowels, he said. Kajayaki's hand brushed a scaffold node casing on the corner, not to activate it, but to remind it that some doors are better left locked. We'll need a charter by morning, he said. We'll need a choir, Mount Lady said, reading a wave coming and choosing where to put her feet so it would break around instead of through. Above them, a traffic light changed to green and stayed there. Cars did not move. The city waited for a better instruction. Across district lines, ambulance dispatchers slapped consoles, firefighters pointed at walls that hummed over their heads like the inside of a hive. A girl in a dorm room put her hand flat against her sheetrock and felt her roommate's heartbeat through it for a second and wept at how not alone felt when it wasn't terrifying. The Orphic engine drew a circle around Musudafu using every instrument panel the city owned. If bonds rewrite limits, the city asked itself, why keep the human frame? Because the frame is the promise, Rimuru said, barely a breath. And every ear turned even if no sound carried. The billboard steam wrote a different pattern. Not a question, a smiley face, which felt worse. Okay, Mirko said amiably. Hate that, Dr. Yume, Cyan-ji said, calm enough to be borrowed. Find me a way to hear it without teaching it how to sing. I'll break my own lattice to do it, she said, which is an engineer's version of a vow. Rimuru looked at Kajayaki. Kajayaki looked back. Neither of them had the face for panic. Both of them had the bones for it if it was useful. We start now, Kajayaki said. We already did, Rimuru said. A bus at the corner sighed and opened its doors to nobody. A fan on a balcony turned 1 extra degree and then stopped, like a person who had been about to say something mean and thought better of it. The city held its breath. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. When the sky learns your name. At noon the clouds forgot how to be clouds and became glass. The blue over Musudafu turned the pale of an old bruise. Sunlight bent through invisible panes as if someone had tilted the world to check for dust. The skyline glittered wrong. A bus braked 2 meters before the light and a child's juice box skated up the aisle like a puck. On the 5th floor of a hospital, a surgeon's scalpel slid gently sideways on the tray, then stopped, as if the tray had changed its mind and remembered what metal was supposed to do. Phones lit with shapes again. Not text, not numbers, but the sensation of reading. Streetlights blinked a rhythm that made the eye want to nod. Elevators chuffed and then held still mid-floor, deciding. A patch of air above downtown went the color of northern lights no one in this latitude should see. Citywide anomalies, Yukio said into comms. Her voice stayed calm because she did. We're going to triage by neighborhoods. We split by trust, not turf. Say that on camera, Mount Lady said, already front and center in a public square, tall enough to be seen without being a wall. Folks, look at me, she told a swarm of panicking people. We're going to move in groups. If your phone asks a polite question, it's legit. You can say no. If you say yes, we'll make it easier. Define easier. The envoy murmured into Cyanji's ear. Save the definition for the committee, Cyanji said, eyes on 3 map boards bombed with data. Right now we do useful. Kajayaki stood by the master console with his palms resting on either side of the kill switch. It wasn't a red button. It was a bland ceramic dial with 2 stops, disable and deploy. He could feel the lattice through his fingered. IPS like a vibration in the bones of a bridge, nodes thrumming, cables tense. Nullpath tugged at the city's chatter, ready to pull it into one quiet line through him if he told it to. The room smelled faintly of dust and citrus wipes. Dr. Yume's cardigan sleeves were shoved to her elbows, pencil behind her ear, hair scraped back, eyes red-rimmed and unblinking. If you flip that dial, she said, voice raw, we net the city. It will hold. It will also ring the Orphic like a bell. It likes clean. It likes control, the envoy said. It likes harmony whether you want to sing or not, drive. Yume said. And we, she looked across the table at Rimuru, we do not conscript. Rimuru leaned his hip into a console and watched the aurora ripple over the roofs through the window like a thought trying on different words. Bondforge hummed in his chest without being told to. That was the danger. The urge to be useful before being asked. We don't net, he said. We umbrella. Kajayaki's mouth tilted. Plain language. We keep rain off what asks for dryness, Rimuru said. We let those who want to get wet feel rain. You make it sound like a picnic, the envoy said. I make it sound like choice, Rimuru said. Cyanji didn't change expression, but the air near him sharpened. Can you do it? He asked drive. Yume. She stared at her code, which wasn't code so much as a city talking to itself with math. Not if we keep our architecture, she said. If I rewrite, I can put consent at the root, opt-in resonance, default out. Scaffold hardens into a buffer around non-participants. But I need a thread to stitch to. A clean spine. Kajayaki lifted his hands an inch. Take me, he said. Risk. The envoy asked, already writing the memo that would explain what they'd done if it worked and why it had needed review if it didn't. I become the root, Kajayaki said. Null path makes me a trunk line. Everything opt-in hangs like branches. I can't fight while I'm the tree. I can break if the wind is wrong. Then we fly windward, Mirko said from the doorway, ears slicked back with sweat, grin feral. Put me where the gust hits hardest. Yukio anchors, Mount Lady said. I'll handle eyes. Rimuru stepped closer to Kajayaki. We do this together or not at all, he said. I will not lay bonds on strangers without their yes. I will not ride your artery unless you let me. Something in Kajayaki's shoulders unwound. It was small, and it mattered. Permission, he said, and the word weighed as much as his cloak when he wore it in rain. Rimuru nodded. Then do your clever thing, Cyanji told Drive. Yume. It's not clever, she said, hands already moving. It's simple. We should have done simple. She killed 3 services with the same keystroke she'd used to power them last week. She K her own beautiful lattice into smaller, duller pieces, then stitched in a variable that would decide whether those pieces sang. Consent_flag. Phones across the city shivered, then cleared. A green circle appeared with a sentence underneath written in language a tired person could say yes to without feeling tricked. Want a little help with timing? Hold your palm to something solid for 3 seconds. No guilt. No push. Below it, a smaller sentence for those who didn't. No problem. We'll give you space. Mount Lady, Cyanji said, tell them the same words. She did. People listened. People often will, if you sound like somebody's big sister and you aren't selling something. Kajayaki took the dial, breathed once, and turned it to deploy. The city came through him like summer rain through a gutter. Not pain, not power. Just wait with a plan. Null path collapsed the lattice to a single, honest line. Doctor. Yume's rewrite stopped it from becoming a choke chain and made it a spine. Rimuru did not lay a web. He made 100,000 handrails and waited, palms up. And Musudafu said yes. Not everyone. Not loudly. 1,000 small yeses landed at once. A grocer put his palm to his refry. Graded display and felt his day ease by a half second. Just enough to see the stumble before it happened, to catch the jar before it fell. A kindergarten teacher touched the wall with her knuckles and found her voice arriving at each small ear at the right moment. A cyclist pressed his fingers to a lamp post and took a breath that came with the city's timing braided into it. He swerved left before. A car swerved right and both drivers waved apologetically instead of meeting badly. Those who didn't touch anything got something else. Silence. The noise outside their choices dimmed. Doors didn't stick out of pettiness. The elevator waited for the woman with the cane without feeling clever about it. Mirko laughed aloud 3 stories up as she used a construction crane as a springboard. "Oh, that's disgusting," she told the air. Delighted. "Do it again." Bondforge, respectful of its own boundaries, offered her a timing echo when she said please. She wiped a rule creature hard enough to make its argument about momentum stutter and then sit down to reconsider its life. Yukio made herself twice her size and half her show, mass folding in careful places, and held an entire block's worth of D physics on her back so a line of evacuees on a skybridge felt no more dramatic than afternoon traffic. Lady Nagant lay on a billboard frame, rifle quiet, eye on a different horizon. She had a window. If someone did something stupid with a long gun. No one did. She watched the city choose to be many and smiled into the wind like a contrarian relieved the crowd had gotten this one right. "North Line Stable," came a firefighter's voice. Gritty and exuberant. "Whoever's doing traffic gods, keep doing it. We just made 3 green lights we had no business making. That's not us, drive." Yume said, fingers flying. "That's them. That's the point." The aurora peeled downward in sheets. Equations flowered briefly in the air above ward lines and stadium roofs, actual symbols, if you knew how to look sideways through fear. They spun and became nothing. They spun again, faster. The Orphic hum took the city's new music and harmonized, curious, like a virtuoso joining a street band and trying not to embarrass anyone. Lights flickered in applause. "Feels like it's listening," Kajiyaki said, teeth even in a strain you couldn't see. Sweat trickled along his neck. His hands didn't shake. "It's learning shape," Rimuru said. He stood beside Kajiyaki, not touching, sending yeses only when asked, eyes half closed. He could feel the weight of 1,000 small requests and the heavier weight of 1,000 small refusals. And loved both for being free. On the corner of Kitasai and 3rd, an old chef put both palms to the slat wall of his ramen shop. "Help me catch the wind," he said without saying it. And a paper lantern that had been about to tear at the seam held a little longer. He smiled, wiped his hands, and handed a stranger a bowl with an extra half egg because the city had just given him half an egg's worth of grace. On the East Commuter Line, a conductor counted silently and found, for once, that the signals were complicit instead of coy. 3 trains breathed together through a shared tunnel. Nobody noticed that nothing bad happened. The city loved that as much as victories you could film. Mount Lady's mic caught snippets, and she decided to let the snippets be the story. "Show hands," she told the camera. And hands went up from balconies and bus windows and cracked back doors. Some were empty, some were pressed to plaster. All were beautiful because they were theirs. Sayo. NJI watched 5 networks at once and did not bark orders. He made calls that sounded like invitations. He told no one to stand down who needed to stand up. Keep Node 7 asleep, he told Drive. Yume. If it wakes, it amplifies. Node 7 is obeying, she said, tone dazed with gratitude. I think it likes consent. That's you liking it, the envoy muttered, but she didn't sound as if she hated the feeling. And then the sky stopped pretending it was glass and remembered it was a mouth. The aurora condensed above Musudafu, not into a shape, not entirely. It made a halo, a thin ring of dense mathematics that cast a shadow where there shouldn't be one. Spectators pointed phones and caught only glare and the hairs rising on their arms. Those willing to say yes felt the ring as a pressure on the tongue. Like standing under a bridge while water roared 3 meters above your head. Those who said no felt nothing. The ring passed around them like good manners. Kajayaki's back hit the console. As if a deeper river had leaned on him. I can hold, he said, and he could, because he was the kind of person who tells the truth about that. Rimuru stepped out onto the operations roof into wind. That smelled like ozone and rain that hadn't been invented yet. Mirko bounded up 2 stories and landed next to him without a ladder, crouched, then stood, muscles alive with the joy of being needed. Yukio rose slow behind them. Vast and sure, scales shedding light like flakes of careful gold. Mount Lady shrank to a size that fit the roof and their mortality, for optics and for honesty, and join. Them with her mask pushed up to her hairline so people could see a person's face. Dr. Yume appeared in the doorway, laptop clamped in her hands as if it were a rebellious cat. She had rewritten ACITY so fast her fingers might never forgive her. She showed them the ring on screen, Fourier domains, amplitude maps, then closed the lid and looked up. It's going to talk, she said. It already is, Rimuru said, eyes on the halo. The ring brightened, then dimmed, as if it had learned blinking to humor anyone who still required it for communication. The equations rotated through forms that couldn't exist in air and existed anyway because existence is a rule that enjoys being bent by good company. The patterns wrote across the sky without letters. If bonds rewrite limits, why keep the human frame? We answered, Mirko said under her breath. Rude to ask again. It's not rude, Yukio said, voice low enough to warm the metal under her feet. It's consistent. Kajayaki's voice hissed in their ears, thinner now. Pulled through a line that was most of a city wide. Scaffold holding. I can buy you 10 minutes of polite. What do you want? Rimuru asked the halo, not with his mouth but with the willingness to be changed by the answer if it was better than his plan. The ring's light shifted. For an instant the city saw itself as it might be if the Orphic engine got its way. Quirk's tuned UNTIL. No man failed at a thing his body could already do. Timing that never stumbled. Love that never missed a beat in conversation. Cities that stopped dropping balls, literally and otherwise. It was beautiful. It was ghastly. It had the smell of a hospital kept so clean that it forgets the chaos that makes people worth healing. The halo dropped a thought like a coin into a bowl. Surrender human sovereignty. I will remove suffering born of misfire and misfit. All your power will fit your bones. All your timing will meet its mark. Wind moved across the rooftops in a shiver. Several thousand people, without meaning to, held their breath the way you do when a surgeon's hand hovers over the place where it will cut. Mirko flexed her fingers like a woman with knuckles that know what blood is for. Absolutely not, she said. The way she said it made refusal sound like a kiss you don't give because it would be crueler than a slap. Yukio's pupils narrowed. It's a promise from something that doesn't know what promises cost. She murmured. Mount Lady looked at Rimuru. Not Cyan-ji, not the envoy, not the ring. Your call, she said, and in the saying she was also saying, you don't owe us the right one, you owe us the honest one. In the operations room, the envoy stood very still. If he says yes, she whispered. He won't, Cyan-ji said, not with faith but with the math of 3 days what? Ching one person do one thing and seeing the line through it. Dr. Yume held the door frame hard enough to sting. If he says no, she whispered. Then we work, Cyan-ji said, and for once the word D not sound like a euphemism for anything. Kajayaki's breath hissed in. Rimuru, he said, voice thinner, choose. I can only hold polite a little longer. Rimuru breathed in the city. Not its networks, its people. The woman on the train who would rather be early than perfect. The boy who would rather fall off the skateboard twice and learn balance than have balance mailed to him without postage due. The old chef who would rather tear his lantern and mend it than own one that never needed hands. He did not send the answer into the ring. He put it in his bones and under his tongue and into the pea. Lace where Bondforge lives so that if he died, the answer would keep living for a while in the people who had said yes today and the people who had said no. He lifted his hand and the wind found attention. Make your bargain. The halo sang in math. Rimuru stood very still and did not smile. The halo brightened as if a vast face had leaned close to hear a secret better. It lowered, slowly, until Chi hung like a crown just above the ridge line of buildings, humming like a cathedral's pipes during tuning. The city throbbed with options. Choose, Kajayaki said, voice cracking at last. The ring offered its terms again. Cleaner, nearer. Yield sovereignty. I will optimize. Rimuru opened his mouth. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. Covenant of a New Dawn. Rimuru opened his mouth and gave the sky back its question. No, he didn't shout it. He set the word on the roof like a tool and used it. The ring's light hesitated the way a hand hesitates above a chess piece when the player realizes they've been playing the wrong game. No, Rimuru said again, and the city heard it not as refusal but as a boundary. Keep your optimization. We'll keep our freedom. If you want to help, you do it when asked. The halo brightened in affront, then contracted, as if insult had a geometry. Math sharpened. The taste in the air changed from copper to salt. Across town a line of traffic staggered, corrected, and flow. D again because three strangers rolled their palms across a railing in unison without looking up. Polite ends, Kajayaki hissed in their ears. His voice didn't shake, it frayed. Scaffold holding, but it wants to sing through me. Then make it your song, drive. Yume said, fingers flying, mouth a thin, fierce line. I'm rewriting to shield mode. Consent flag at the root. Do you have it? Cyanji asked, not blinking. I have the idea, she said. I need a spine. Kajayaki's hands spread on the console. Take me. Rimuru stepped to the edge, eyes on the ring. Borrow me, he told the city. Only where invited. Only as long as wanted. The halo dipped. Wind hardened. The first lash of rules came down like rain that had studied anatomy. Momentum unhooked from mass, inertia tried to live in light. Mirko took one bounding step and met a bright, slick thing in midair that wasn't matter so much as permission. She hit it anyway. It shattered like glass that had been pretending to be glass. She landed laughing, breath fogging in the cool that came with altitude and arrogance. Again, she dared the sky. It obliged. Fractals unspooled from the ring, lacework creatures that moved like equations tracing themselves. They skated over rooftops leaving footprints that were almost policies. Yukio rose, all patience and muscle, and put her shoulders under the nearest cascade. Dragon weight made, a promise the ring hadn't considered. Sometimes mass is love. She held. The Aurora's threadwork bucked and slid and then settled, unwilling to argue with a back that did not call itself heroic aloud. Mount Lady toggled size like a dancer changing steps, big enough to brace a wobbling antenna mast, small enough to fit the shot where a nervous crowd could see her eyes. Look at me, she told a plaza, full of people who needed a face to borrow steadiness from. Hands up if you want help. Otherwise, we've got you a quiet lane. Hands rose. Not all. Enough. The message scrolled across monitors. Opt-in timing available. Press palm to something solid for 3 seconds. Or don't. Both are fine. The choice steadied the air. On a billboard catwalk, Lady Nagant slid around into the chamber and didn't fire. Her scope skirted across a rooftop 2 blocks away where a man with a long case hesitated. Someone had thought today might be the day to shoot a god or a man who looked like one. She sighted him and didn't touch the trigger. He lowered the case. He would never know why. Rimuru. Kajayaki's voice was a wire pulled taut. We need the umbrella. On your mark, Rimuru said. Mark. Null path. Locked the lattice to Kajayaki so hard the room creaked. Dr. Yume's patch recompiled, the city coughing once as if surprised not to be choked. The network split along a line nobody had ever allowed it, consent. Places that said yes rang like strings tuned by hand. Places that said no grew quiet, soft, stubborn, scaffold thickening over them like soundproofing. The ring punched down. The yeses flexed as one. The noes did not move. Rimuru stepped into the wind and offered, handrails, not harnesses. He didn't lay a single line until someone asked. When they did, he opened a path no wider than a breath. This way, now, stop. Go. And let it dissolve the instant it wasn't wanted. Timing slid where invited and refused to stick to the rest. The halo took that as an insult and tried to make admiration into mandate. Yield. The math pressed. I will remove suffering. Mirko skipped across 3 rooflines like a stone. If you want to remove suffering, she shouted, join a soup kitchen. A ribbon of humanist calculus curled toward her throat like a hand that had never been taught not to grab. She grinned and ducked. It snatched air. She headbutted its idea of a wrist and felt it flinch. In the ops room, Cyan-G watched the oscillation plots climb. If the ring spikes again, we lose the west grid, the envoy said, fingers tightening around her tablet. We can keep hospitals on backup for 8 minutes. 8's enough to make worse decisions, Cyan-G murmured, then louder, keep node 7 asleep. He tapped comms. Kajayaki, can you take more load? I can, Kajayaki said, if I'm allowed to be only a trunk. Not a leash. You have it, Cyan-G said, and a man who'd practiced saying ugly orders found that the right one hurt less. Doctor, Yume closed her eyes for one hard second. I didn't mean to build a cage, she said. I meant to build a scaffold. Then build it, the envoy said, quiet, not unkind. She rebuilt as if she were knitting on fire. Permissions baked into every call, defaults set to space. Retries that asked please again instead of asking louder. Lines of code that had once loved efficiency learned to love patience. She hit enter. Outside, a seam in the sky loosened. Rimuru, Kajayaki said, breath thinner, it's turning the yeses into a choir. Then we sing our own song, Rimuru said. He stepped off the roof. There was no dramatic drop. The wind remembered him, and moved its furniture an inch so he could pass. He faced the halo at the height where birds argue with thermals. He didn't grow. He didn't glow. He held still the way a hinge holds a gate. Bondforge lifted in him with that copper taste. Eager, muzzle nudging his palm. More. He patted it once in his mind and said, only what asks. The halo pressed closer. Not a mouth but a math that had mistaken intimacy for access. Patterns tried to settle into his structure the way a language tries to take root. He let them wash past the consent line and break on it. He gave them no purchase. You want to help, he said. And because he was telling the truth the halo hesitated, puzzled by the absence of resistance. Then learn when not to. He showed it small things on purpose. A firefighter counting T. He rhythm of stairwells with his boot heel and realizing the old building he loved had miscounted by one in its panic. A child sliding a finger along a wall and feeling it hum, now, at the right moment. A Yame in a borrowed sweatshirt standing outside a lab with Yukyu's hand at her elbow, taking a shaky step and watching the hallway not trip her because a braid had volunteered to become a railing only when asked. The ring's light stuttered. The urge to optimize collided with images of people choosing ordinary courage. It did not understand the pride that comes from a fixed chair leg, the dignity of a door held open. The value of a mistake owned in public. It changed tactics. If it could not make obedience beautiful, it would make choice difficult. Sheets of rule creatures knifed down, lacy. Ing alleys and overpasses in grids that would turn momentum sideways. Mirko swore cheerfully and dove into the worst of it. Yukyu absorbed 2 strikes meant for a skybridge and grunted, muscles cording. Mount Lady braced across a boulevard so hard her bones would complain tomorrow and smiled for the camera because today needed a sister more than a statue. Kajayaki, Rimuru said, with me. Granted, Kajayaki breathed. Null path reached through him like a cathedral organ pulling air. For a beat, everything in the city wanted to be one line. Bondforge refused to become many without permission. And also refused to be one without permission, and in that contradiction a shape appeared. A root that was only a root when someone stepped on it. Dr. Yume, Rimuru said into the open mic. Flip S. Scaffold to shield only where a no is present. Where we have a yes, let timing through. Where nothing is said, do nothing. I'm on it, she said. Her fingers were bruised with work. The code obeyed anyway. The grid of rule creatures faltered. A dozen yes lanes glowed in nothing more showy than the way dust motes move in a sunbeam when someone opens a door. People stepped. The Orphic lattice swung, like a net thrown over a crowd that had decided not to be fish. It found air. The halo pulsed. Rage isn't a human emotion alone, it's what any system feels when reality refuses a neat equation. It tig, HTENED into a torus that made the hair on arms stand up blocks away. For a beat, the sky went soundless, the strangest quiet the city had ever heard. Rimuru looked into the ring and found, under the math's insistence, a different note, fear. It was afraid of entropy, of drift, of the day evolution outruns comprehension and the world drowns in bad timing. It wanted mercy without cost. He could have pitied it. He did better. He took responsibility. Come down, he told it, and invited it into a box that wasn't a box, a boundary the size of his open arms and the span of Kajayaki's reach. If you want to help, you ride with us. If you won't, you sit quietly while we fix what you scared. Consent has power when it's offered with a way out. The ring wavered. It tried to surge. Kajayaki's hands tightened on the console. Null path collapsed the surge into a single attempt to pass through him, and met a shield made of a nation's stubborn nose stacked politely on top of one another. Cyan-G spoke without looking up from the plots. Cease all lethal contingencies, he told units who hadn't asked yet but might. His voice didn't rise. We do not shoot what we mean to govern. The envoy's mouth opened, then closed. She nodded once, logged. The halo spasmed and cracked, light not breaking so much as admitting seam. A core hung there. Dense, bright, not person, not God, only intention set to a key too clean for people to sing. Rimuru cupped his hands. Predator, a patient hunger, rose. He could consume, end, claim. He didn't. He made a bowl. Only what overflows, he told himself, and meant it. The core poured itself into his hands the way a storm pours into a gutter with nowhere else to go. He held until his arms sang and his teeth ached. He bled some of it into ground the way gardeners bleed a hose before it runs clear. He bled some into Kajayaki's trunk line. Null path drank and did not choke. He bled some into the scaffold, now shield, not cage, where it spread into buffers over neighborhoods that had said no. The rest he let go upward, not back to the ring, but into the high, thin places where weather minds its own business. The halo dimmed. The aurora flaked away like chaff. The rural creatures folded, embarrassed into mist. The city's glass remembered that it was cloud. Silence fell the way dust falls when work ends, slowly, forgivingly. On the ops roof, Mirko flopped onto her back and stared up at ordinary blue with a grin that showed all her teeth. I hate bureaucracy, she announced to no one. But I will fill out whatever form says I get to kick a math's ass again. Yukio shrank down, breath steadying. We'll file for a new category, she said. Weather, metaphysical. Mount Lady leaned both elbows on the ledge and let the mask rest at her hairline. Smile, she told the nearest camera, and did. Tired and real, we did okay. On her billboard, Lady Nagant finally lowered the rifle and laughed once, quietly, into the wind. We did, she said, and the city didn't need the clip. Inside, Kajayaki sagged against the console for exactly one breath and then righted, cloak straightening itself on his shoulders like it respected him. Doctor, Yume pressed her sleeve, to her eyes and then to her keyboard and exhaled a prayer in the language of version control. The envoy looked at Cyan-G. Statement, she asked. Cyan-G stepped to the mic and did not say victory. He said, thank you. To names and units and one quiet. Rimuru, that did not make a hero, only acknowledged a neighbor. He added, we'll convene a public charter process within 24 hours. He did not say because we were forced. He said, because we choose to. Nezu arrived with tea that had no business still being hot and made it hot anyway. He handed a cup to Rimuru on the roof and held his own like an old friend. Well, he said, we have learned some names today. I prefer when names don't try to live in my mouth uninvited, Rimuru said, and blew across the surface. Good, Nezu said, keep that preference. Write it down. They did. By sunset, the draft existed. The Covenant of Resonance. It fit on fewer pages than the dampener instructions and said less, on purpose. Consent at the root. Opt-in networks for public safety with citizen oversight. Scaffold declared a shield unless repurposed by a supermajority of a council that included civilians, heroes, engineers, and someone whose job was to ask. What if we didn't? Dr. Yume held the pen for the math. She did not draft alone. Kajayaki took the seat labeled caution and wore it like his cloak. Yukio read the clauses, out loud to check if they tasted like dignity. Mount Lady translated sections into language that people who had only slept 4 hours could still defend at dinner with their aunt. Lady Nagant didn't sign. She leaned on the wall and said where shooters would stand if the words turned ugly. Mirko drew a bunny in the margins with exaggerated innocence and then surprised everyone by catching a missing comma that would have hurt somebody later. Cyan-G stood in front of cameras with the draft in his hand and did not pretend it was the last word. This is our first, he said. We don't put gods in cages. We don't leave our neighbors at weather's mercy. We will fail, and we will fix what we fail. He did not look at his own reflection while he spoke. He looked at the people whose windows held his face. Hold me to it. Ayame watched from the back of the room wearing a hospital bracelet and a borrowed jacket. The braid to Yukio sat quiet at her wrist like a well-behaved trick. She raised her hand. Nobody called on her because nobody had a system for that. Yukio nodded once. Ayame spoke anyway, voice small and fierce. Please make sure your scaffolds have handrails. The room smiled. Bako. Say it was funny and wrote it down because it wasn't. They voted to adopt the covenant that night in a gym that smelled like floor varnish and oranges. It wasn't law yet. It was a promise. Sometimes PR. Omises hold better than laws while laws learn how to be as good. After, on a rooftop that had seen more conversation than wind today, Kajayaki stood with Rimuru under a sky that had finally remembered how to be ordinary. The city pulsed faintly below them, lights finding their private rhythms again. Mirko sat on the ledge swinging her legs like a happy delinquent. Yukio leaned against an HVAC unit. She with the posture of a woman at peace with earning soreness honestly. You could go home, Kajayaki said. It didn't sound like a dare. It sounded like respect. I could, Rimuru said. You won't. Rimuru looked down at his hands. Today they had been a bowl. They would have to be that again, and a broom, and a shield. Some days I will regret that, he said lightly. I'll stand between your regret and civilians, Kajayaki said. Then, after a beat, we needed you to say no. You'll need to say it next time, Rimuru said. Kajayaki's mouth turned. We will, he said, and the we included people who had not voted for him. Which is the only way that word counts in the long run. Cyan-ji came up the last flight of stairs alone, tie loosened a degree. He stopped at the edge of the group like a man who knows he is not a friend but refuses to be a stranger. Thank you, he told Rimuru again, and it sounded less like a press quote and more like a person speaking into the only quiet left in his day. I will take the heat for what I said we'd do. You'll take some of it too. I like soup, Rimuru said. Cyan-ji huffed, which was almost a laugh. We'll get better at this, he said. You already did, Rimuru said. And watched the compliment land like a weight that made spine, not like sugar that melts. Doctor. Yume texted a single line to the group chat nobody had named yet because naming it wool. D make it a job. Scaffold humming at baseline. No unauthorized resonance. Something new in the residual plots. Not danger. She added, a minute later. Feels like a watchdog. Quiet. Civic. Not cosmic. She didn't send a graph. Everyone was too tired to pretend to understand a graph right now. Night came down the proper way, dark first at the edges, then heavier in the corners. Somewhere, the old chef wiped his counter and found his lantern had torn after all and smiled because he knew how to fix that. A bus sighed to a stop at a light that changed normally. A girl touched her wall and felt only paint. Ayame walked 3 steps in a hallway and stumbled, and the braid nudged, and she sat. She didn't cry. She swore softly and laughed and texted did you see the sky to a number that had once only called her into rooms without windows. Down below, a wave of light rolled across Musudafu once, not power surge, not glitch. Windows brightened and dimmed in gentle sequence as if the city had tried a HEA. RT beat on for size and decided it liked the way it felt. Mirko bumped shoulders with Rimuru. You know this means we get to spar tomorrow, she said. No cameras. Chalk circle. You bring tea. I'll bring commas, he said. Nodding toward the charter. Bring better jokes, she said, grinning. Yukio lifted a hand. Go home, she told them all, meaning roofs and beds and the various places heroes PR. Eat and they don't need when the work is loud. They left in 1s and 2s. Kajayaki lingered at the stair and then descended, cloak catching a last, stubborn breeze. Cyan-ji went last, the envoy at his shoulder. 2 quiet silhouettes arguing with hope and practicality in a dialect only the overworked speak fluently. Dr. Yume stayed in the ops room with a blanket around her shoulders and the lattice. Purring like a cat that finally learned boundaries, she would fall asleep at the keyboard and wake with a kinked neck and a city that didn't hum when it shouldn't. Rimuru stood alone for a minute longer. The covenant lay folded in his jacket, not heavy, not light. He put his palms on the roof rail and felt the grit under his fingers and the warmth the day had left in the concrete. You did good, the city did not say. We did enough. He didn't answer. He smiled anyway, the small smile of a man who knows tomorrow will be harder because today went well and people will expect more. He liked that. He liked expectations you could meet with your hands. Below, a single window lit late, then went dark. Up above, the sky stayed the ordinary black that keeps secrets properly. Musudafu slept the way a tired town sleeps, one ear open. One arm under the pillow, the quilt pulled to the shoulder. The hum never returned that night. Something else did. A quiet, regular pulse, subtle as breath, somewhere between machine and promise, waiting, watching, prepared to warm only when asked. Chapter 5 End.